been 10 years since Hurricane Katrina. We all know that many parts of Louisiana and Mississippi had to start over and rebuild. But did you know that a lot of locations have yet to do so? I'm Tara Taffera.
And I'm Holly Biller. In this month's newscast, we are bringing you an interview with Michael Wick, president of the Building Officials Association of Louisiana. USGNN.com editor Nick St. Dennis spoke to him last year when he was in New Orleans.
The backdrop for the interview was the Hyatt, a landmark that became infamous after it was struck by Katrina in August 2005. News outlets showed the hotel's blown-out windows as evidence of Katrina's wrath.
This building was on TV a lot afterwards, after the storm, because it just so happened this is where the mayor was staying at the time. So a lot of times when you saw a building with the windows blown out and the curtains just flying, that was this building that you were seeing. The other popular building that you would see on TV was the Superdome. The roof sustained a tremendous amount of damage on the Superdome. All that has been redone. So there was a tremendous amount of damage from both wind and storm surge. The storm surge is what really got Mississippi. That's what took those buildings out. But it was almost a sickening feeling when you see that kind of damage and people being in, obviously the mayor being here, they thought this was a safe building to be in, and obviously it was not.
Our interview starts with building codes prior to Katrina, or lack thereof. In short, there really were no mandatory statewide building codes in Louisiana.
Luckily, Wick says things are different now, much different.
Prior to Katrina, there was no statewide building codes. You had certain jurisdictions in the state that had building codes, but it was only a handful, and they weren't always kept up to date because there was no mandated code. But after Katrina, the state adopted a mandatory statewide building code, which every jurisdiction in the state has to enforce. It gets updated every 3 years. And so there's generally a lot more building code enforcement today than there was prior to Katrina. The state was very aggressive after Katrina, where most states will kind of phase it in over time. However, the state didn't feel like that would be a good idea based on the disaster that we had just had and the realities of insurance companies leaving and so forth. So they implemented it very quickly. By 2007, we had the whole suite of codes for both commercial and residential structures.
As devastating as Katrina was, it was reassuring to hear Wick tell how swiftly the state took action. They certainly wanted to be prepared for any future megastorms.
One thing we've seen over time was, after Katrina, the wind maps in the IRC got pretty aggressive, and we've seen that tone back a little bit over the years, each edition that comes out, because they may have overestimated some of those wind speeds, but I think it was done out of an abundance of caution because, like you said, it was such a disaster, an unprecedented disaster. They were doing everything they could to prevent something like that from happening again.
In fact, the state was hit by additional hurricanes, and Wick says the code changes had a real impact in preventing widespread damage.
We've had storms since then. One of the parishes that I cover was a direct hit for Gustav in 2008. And if you rode around that parish, you could immediately tell what homes were built after Katrina and before Katrina. There was a tremendous difference. There was basically no damage to the homes built after Katrina, but the ones prior to Katrina suffering some significant damage.
Those comments really show that it's not just a matter of code changes. They have to be enforced.
That's right. Wick talked a lot about how this wasn't common practice prior to Katrina, and that enforcement definitely happens now. He says this is particularly good news for commercial structures.
That's just the way it was. There was no enforcement. Nobody was keeping up with the most recent developments and what we should be doing. There were a lot of homes that held up just fine in Katrina, but I really think you saw a bigger impact on the commercial buildings because prior to Katrina, the only thing we were enforcing on commercial buildings was life safety codes. There was no building code. So, there was a lot of significant buildings out there that sustained damage that probably shouldn't have sustained the amount of damage they did had we been following a code.
Hurricane Katrina brought massive change to the construction industry. Wick also talked about how designing with glass evolved.
Prior to the adoption of the codes, I don't think anyone was really paying attention to design pressure ratings for glass or impact glass or shuttering or any of those things. And of course, one of the things that came along with that as well was the energy requirements and so forth with glass, which is not necessarily a structural component, but those are the added benefits that we get from the codes as well. But yeah, there's a big emphasis now on making sure all windows and doors are designed pressure rated properly, making sure that they're either impact glass or they're shuttered with approved shuttering systems. And we've seen more of a movement towards the impact glass, although it's not mandatory if shutters are an option. I think just economically, people have found out that it's a feasible thing to do, and so you're seeing more and more use the impact glass. I think there's more of an awareness of when you are designing something with a lot of glass and so forth, that there's a lot of elements that you need to take into account other than just it looks nice. And so I think there's more awareness. I still think you have some very modern design buildings that you see today. But I think there's a lot more emphasis on the engineering behind those designs than there was prior.
For much more on Katrina, see the July issue of U.S. Glass Magazine.
We hope you enjoyed this special report. We'll see you next time.